Well, welcome back to segment 3 of an interesting session that we're having here with Fredrik Nilsson. Fredrik, when we finished off segment 2, we were talking about some of the aspects around cybersecurity and the cloud, and we touched on an interesting topic around facial recognition. Would you care to maybe give us a little bit more insight into that aspect?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Derek. And I don't know if you recall, but back after 9/11, there was a big push, and there was a couple of companies that are no longer in existence, or they merged with other companies as well out there, that started to do facial recognition running on computer servers, and Axis doing some of the first network cameras back then, worked with them to see if we can integrate it and run it on the cameras and kind of an onboard application. Long story short, a lot of airports installed it just to shut it down a couple of weeks later because there was too many false positives. And you think of an application that is 90% accurate, and you think that that's maybe good enough, and then you have airports that have 100,000 people coming through every day. That's 10,000 people you have to take to the side and question them extra. Yeah. So it didn't really work very well. But it's been a little bit of not a holy grail, but also a controversial topic. Do we want it? Do we not want it? And you mentioned as well, I think it was 2 years ago, a couple of cities in California and some here in Massachusetts as well, where I'm based out of, that put rules around facial recognition and what you can do outside in the city's environment for the protection of privacy of people. So facial recognition got a little bit of a bad name, and people said, I don't want facial recognition. But if you think about it, you're using it every day. If you have an iPhone, at least as I have, and probably on Android as well, when you do Face ID, that's facial recognition, which gladly you've approved because it's very convenient to you. If you travel into the United States, that I did I was visiting Canada a couple of weeks ago, you come and use global entry. Today, I don't have to show my card or my passport. I just look in front of the camera and it says, welcome back, and it knows who I am. That's a very convenient application as well. And if you go through turnstiles at the transportation system like the MBTA here in Boston, for safety and security, to know who entered, who no exit, very, very controlled environment, and you know they're probably going to have video surveillance for security there. So those are all good applications. But then it comes to tracking citizens in the city, them unknowing on the streets, to track their whereabouts, is of course something that none of us want. So I think it's important when you talk about those video analytics that you talk about in what context, in what application, and what use case you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very important. There's always a good application to some of these innovations, and there's always that slippery slope, and so the context is key. The other thing that is always interesting to me, and I'm sure to a lot of the people in our audience, is who owns that data and who's responsible for its appropriate use, because that's the key as well, isn't it? Because there's an application for it, but then there's another application which is adjacent to it, which is like a bit shady, and who's responsible for the appropriate use of the data?
So there is some laws and regulation how it can be used, and then the question is, it also comes down, who do you trust? Is it the government running this data? It's the same thing with the database, huge databases we have with the big IT companies that own tremendous amount of data about you and I on social media that we have very little control of, which is what GDPR is trying to address over in Europe. They're probably going to come to the United States as well. So I think it comes down to who you trust. When it comes to video surveillance and any security data, it's owned by the company who has recorded it. So if it's an airport, it's the airport authority, the transport authority. If it's a retailer, it's the retailer owns that data. They have certain rules where they can put up cameras, but for the most part, within their own facilities, they can do surveillance wherever they want, basically, and they own that data as well. Is there a consent that you sign when you walk into the airport? No. But there's an expectations that it's a surveilled area, either by police or by systems like video surveillance systems.
The monitoring of those owners of the data, I guess, is where it really comes into, who's checking on those people to make sure that they're doing the right thing with it. And I suppose that's where it gets down to, is it government's responsibility to do that, etc. It obviously, there's still lots of challenges, still lots of issues that people have to work through, and there are a number of very solid, uh, interest groups and bodies that are looking closely at this. So I'm sure more to come as far as compliance with privacy law, etc., is concerned. In the meantime, though, one of the fundamental things with analytics is using the right data at the right time. Are we looking at the right data? Is it the data that's relevant to the question we're trying to analyze for, etc.? How is that being handled at this point in time?
So I think, and that's a good question. If you look at the whole market and just to put some context onto numbers here, when it comes to the market that we as a manufacturer of systems are addressing, which is kind of the equipment market. If you look at the Americas, so North and South America, of course, US being the largest of that, that's around a $12 billion market that Access Communications is operating on. Our end customers, in turn, are spending 60 billion on making their operations safe and secure in the Americas every year. So that means 80% of the spending goes towards manual labor, which is, of course, design services, installation service, maintenance services, but also, as you mentioned, monitoring services. Well, people that sit and look at video and trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
You need some live situational awareness. I've been in some monitoring centers in some large cities where they're accessing in a big control room 30,000 cameras. And yes, there might be 100 people, but it's really hard to monitor 30,000 cameras and see what's going on. And that's where we talked about in the first segment, integrating systems together, different sensors in the transport system, access control, fire and safety equipment, and also using analytics to tag when there's abnormal activity to draw attention to those areas in a building or in a city where something is happening, because otherwise it becomes almost an impossible challenge.
Yeah, and that's where really unleashing machine learning, AI, and all those kinds of things really starts coming into its own. Artificial intelligence can classify objects, allowing humans to rapidly make decisions and those types of things. So if you could maybe just give us some insights, some examples maybe of how, you mentioned earlier that some of the cameras and things have really started being embedded or imbued with some of these capabilities. You talk a little bit more about that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that can be used in combination with people monitoring cameras today. And there's some recent developments over the last couple of years. You have what you call in cities and some areas a pan-tilt zoom camera, where you can kind of zoom in far away with an optical lens so you can see clearly far away. And if you're an operator of that camera, you have good control about that area, but the further you zoom in, the more you miss around the other 360 that is around you. So with some of the recent innovations, you have a kind of 360 view as part of the camera that always sees what's going on. You can even build in audio sensors to get shotgun detection and things like that into the camera, and then automatically control the pan-tilt zoom cameras to the area with activity, so that the operator doesn't have to sit and sway around in the city and maybe getting too excited about looking into a storefront window somewhere when something else is happening at another position of the camera. So that is developing very, very quickly with the capabilities of deep learning, where you can do true object detection and classify objects and saying if anything is going faster than this speed, that's when you're going to go to this area. If you have too many people with yellow vests on in this area, you should check on this area, and so forth, and set up that kind of logic. So it's becoming, once you sit in front of those monitors and start trying to operate it, you get dizzy pretty quickly, because there's so much action, so much going on, and so many areas you can look at, that you need some help from machine learning and deep learning to do that effectively.
And how much adoption has there been of those kinds of capabilities at this point in time? Are we really early days, do you think, or?
There is, let me say, there is customers that started to invest in this a couple of years ago, come a really long way, but otherwise, one challenge with those systems is they're relatively expensive to put in place with the cabling and everything. So while you and I talk about IT equipment that has a lifespan of 3 to 5 years, in the security video surveillance span, typically people want them to last for 8 to 10 years, at least 5 years plus.
Yeah.
And if you have 5-year-old technology and build on the system generation 5 years ago, you're not going to have any of those capabilities. But some cities, some airports, some school have very, very modern system where they have a lot of those capabilities built in today.
Interesting, interesting. Commercial versus government, interest in these kinds of areas. Are you finding that there's kind of an equal dispersion of opportunities to deploy these kinds of things, or has it tended to be one sector rather than another?
I would say there's a lot of interest from all those sectors and segments. For example, on the private side, data centers is a very sensitive are very sensitive to security, not only for cyber but also physical security application. They're investing a lot in video surveillance.
Mm-hmm.
Airports, schools, private or public, they might be. Retail as well. There's still a lot of retail space out there, and they want to use that as effectively as possible. So they're probably on the edge when it comes to using the data for more business operations applications as well, to provide help for cash registers, for queue management, for how they stage things in the retail stores, and so forth.
And comparing your background in Europe versus the Americas, is it kind of pretty much the same level, or in terms of adoption, or is one leading another, and what might be the reasons?
It's definitely come in different ways. I'd say when it comes to the earliest adopter of video surveillance, it was probably the England and the UK, after all the challenges they had with local terrorism back in the 70s and 80s. There was tons of video surveillance being put in place. Then here in the US, we started to have it in early 2000, 9/11, school shootings and so forth. And now it's basically happening everywhere. And video surveillance and security is an important part of the fabric, whether we like it or not, and to provide a more safe and smart environment in basically every country today, including Sweden, where I'm from, which seems like a very nice and safe small country, but there's lots of video surveillance and security systems there as well. And I think that also has to do with a drive in any environment and any modern country to automate and digitize things as much as possible, because the option is to have more guards and police out on the streets. They can do more meaningful things than sitting in a car and watching in a parking lot and see if there's a bad guy shows up.
Right. Yeah, I think that's fundamentally the message I think that I've been hearing from you in the last couple of segments as well. Is this is really about creating not only a smarter and a world, but also a safer world. And it's the two are really hand in hand, and both of them are really where we should be focusing our attention. And tons of great innovation has taken place, but there's a ton of room for even more innovation as we step forward into this. So thanks for the insights that you've shared with us. And as we close this final segment, I wanted to just get your thoughts on one final thing. If you were a chief data officer of, let's say, a retail company, or maybe a city, and you were just starting out on your company's data and analytics transformation journey, what advice would you give him or her regarding video surveillance data?
Well, when this person discover that the amount of data they have the most plentiful amount of is video surveillance, hopefully that triggers their interest in doing something meaningful with this data, except to just deleting after 730 or 180 days or whatever the retention time is.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of great applications out there from manufacturers like Access Communications, from partners, from other companies as well, where you can make a lot of meaningful other data, metadata out of the data you're already generating. So I would start reaching out to companies and or connect with other large, if it's cities, airports, private companies, to see what they're doing in this space. And it's a very collaborative industry, the security industry. There is great trade shows every year in a couple of places, and go and listen to seminars there. It's quite fascinating. And once they start doing that, just like you and I will do now, or I have done for a long time, they're going to start looking up everywhere and seeing cameras and seeing opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, especially when you drive through a red traffic light. Be
Yeah,
sure to wave.
yeah, I'll be sure to wave. That's what you do, right?
Yes. Fredrik, thank you so much. I think this is certainly, from my perspective, been really enlightening and fascinating to see the level of maturity that we've already achieved with a lot of the innovations, and looking at some of the challenges and opportunities going forward. It's certainly something that's here to stay, and it's great to see that it's in capable hands of intelligent people and companies that are really thinking this one through with the right level of responsibility being applied as well. So once again, thank you so much. We've really appreciated talking to you, and all the best going forward.
Thank you, Derek. Thanks for having me. It was great chatting with you.